Hey everybody, welcome to the channel, True Crime Stories. If you're new to the channel, please hit that like button and subscribe so you can hear more. Thanks for stopping by. This is kind of a continuation of the story about Valerie Stevens, even though this is about a different woman. Some people believe that the two cases might have been connected, as well as several other missing and murdered young women in that area of Ontario during around those same years, but I couldn't find anything that said that there was a link. There was no DNA or anything like that that linked these cases. I think the reason some people thought they could be connected is because these women started to disappear and were later found murdered. They said Valerie Stevens was supposed to be hitchhiking home, so she may have been picked up by somebody, but this is the story of Lynda Shaw. And here is a little bit about her. She was born in 1968. In 1990, Easter Sunday weekend, she spent the weekend with her family in Brampton. She was driving back to college where she was a third-year engineering student. She stopped around midnight at a food service station to get some food. It's believed that while she was inside purchasing food, someone tampered with her tire. All the air had been let out of her tire. Police believe this was the reason that Lynda stopped alongside the road. Her car was found less than a mile and a half, I think, from the service station where she had stopped. Her Dodge Shadow would be found the next morning abandoned beside the road. Her belongings were all still inside her car, and the food that she had purchased was still in the bag sitting on the front seat. Her rear window had been smashed out. Now, police believe it's possible that Lynda realized she was getting a flat tire and she pulled over beside the road to see what was going on. Now, like I said, her car was found close enough to the service station. It was a little bit of a distance, but she could have walked back. And this is the reason police believe someone targeted her, let the air out of her tire, and then waited and followed her down that roadway, knowing that her tire would go flat. So they believe that this person pulled over beside of Lynda with the pretense of saying that they were going to help fix her tire. I can't figure out why the rear window was smashed out unless Lynda realized she was in some type of danger, ran and got back inside and locked her doors, and this person smashed the window out. But it would have made more sense for them to smash the front window or the passenger's side window. But either way, her window was smashed out. Some people wondered if maybe he had even shot the window out. Police looked for Lynda for 6 days. When they found her car abandoned beside the road, someone came upon it. They reported this car with the window smashed out and a flat tire, this woman's purse and other belongings on the seat. And they knew something wasn't right, so they reported this. The police came out, and then they began to look for Lynda. They searched for her for 6 days. Sadly, her body would be found not too far from where she was. She had been raped and murdered. The killer had left behind DNA. He had left behind semen and hair, but DNA testing was in the very early stages in 1990. Police did also find a half-burned parka that had been left near the body. Keep this in mind for later in this story. Witnesses would come forward later and say that they had seen Lynda's car sitting beside the road that night. One witness told police he was certain that there was a car parked behind Lynda's car that night, and he was pretty sure it was a 1970s model Chrysler Newport in a beige color. He said the car stood out because it was one of these older, large, very, like they call them boats of a car, very big. The police got hundreds of tips in this investigation. They say that they followed up on all of these tips, but they got nowhere. This, along with the parka, will come up again later. Lynda's case grew cold after a few years. In 2003, a new detective took over the case. Now, at this point, the case was a 13-year-old cold case. The crime lab was working with new technology and began to re-examine Lynda's case. They began to test the samples that they had found at the crime scene, and they were able to build a DNA profile. They collected 300 samples to test against the DNA left behind by the killer, but they found no match. They decided to resubmit the hairs left behind one final time. 15 years had passed, and police finally thought that they had the killer. They say that the killer was named Alan Craig MacDonald. Now, here's where all this gets very, very strange. Alan Craig MacDonald was not unknown to this new detective whose name was Collins. Now, when Collins was a police officer before he became a detective, he was involved in a case in a high-speed chase in 1994 with this MacDonald. MacDonald was arrested by Collins, and he described him as being a huge man. He said he was well over 6 feet tall and 250 pounds. He said that MacDonald showed no emotion. Now, in 1975, MacDonald had committed a double murder. One was of a police officer, and the other was a taxi cab driver who witnessed the murder. He was sentenced to life in prison for these two murders, but for some reason that nobody was willing to give a reason for, he was released after only 12 years. He was put on parole and was living in a halfway house. Now, he was living in a halfway house not very far from where Lynda was murdered. At this time, MacDonald was facing going back to jail for an unrelated stolen property charge. It was said that he took a shot into a phone booth and killed himself, a shotgun. Now, they claim that this MacDonald took a shotgun and went into a phone booth and shot himself, killed himself, because he didn't want to go back to prison. Now, he had been interviewed by the police shortly after Lynda's murder, but there was nothing to link him to her. He gave them a hair sample, and now we go back to the coat. They didn't link the coat to MacDonald because they said it would not have fit him. This is what makes me wonder if he was if he was the culprit at all, or if some people in the police force, higher ups, possibly wanted just to solve this case and be done with this case because they were getting so much negative, press. And the family of Lynda was always wanting to know, if they were working on this case. They said that the half-burned parka that they found would not have fit MacDonald, who was very large and probably would have worn a much larger size coat. So they couldn't link that coat to him. It wasn't his known criminal acts. He was not known to be a rapist or a stalker of women. And so it was surprising that while there were other women in the area being raped and left murdered, like Valerie Stevens and others, come back and do some stories on some of these other women, but they were going missing and being raped and murdered around this same time. And this man had no background history of anything like that they knew about. So a lot of people thought the fact that he had given his DNA and had given this hair sample, that maybe he was just being used as a scapegoat because he was already deceased by this time, and this would have put a close to this case. And MacDonald was a known thief and had been convicted of shooting two men. He had no convictions or had never been accused of any such sex crimes. Police's theory was that MacDonald's had an accomplice. So see, they want to say that he had someone else working with him. And I'm no expert by any means, but it's very rare for anyone who stalks women. Now, it has been known to happen. There are a few isolated cases, but it's very rare for someone who goes out of their way to stalk and go to this trouble to let the air out of a woman's tire and follow her down a dark road to have an accomplice. And so and I think that the police created this. A lot of people believe that the police created this so-called accomplice to answer the questions of, well, whose coat was it? Because it wouldn't have fit this man. He was too big. And so they created this accomplice. They believe that MacDonald, there's theories out there that MacDonald was a police informant, and therefore that was the reason why he was let out of jail early. And this is the reason why his DNA was never linked to any other sex crimes, because he wasn't a rapist or a stalker of women. That was just not in his background. Many believe that MacDonald did not commit suicide and that he did not rape or murder Lynda, but that he was a scapegoat to close this case. But now it would be years later before the police claimed that the DNA was linked to him to Lynda's death. Lynda Shaw was murdered 15 years before this came out. Police announced Friday that they now know who killed her and that it was a man who was on parole for serving 12 years for 2 murders. Shaw's mother, Carol Taylor, had police deliver a blunt statement on her behalf. I feel that Lynda and our family have been betrayed by a federal judicial system. They put a cold-blooded murderer back out on the street. Lynda certainly was not the first such victim, and she will probably not be the last, as long as our elected politicians allow this justice system to continue. Police announced that they now know who killed Lynda, but they won't say who it was. They wouldn't tell who the man's name was. They said he had died in 1994, and we have now learned that this person was a convicted killer, and that was probably the reason why they wouldn't tell who he was, because for some reason that nobody would explain, the judicial system released this man from a life in prison sentence after only 12 years. The police have put this case to rest in their minds, and that's where it stands. Before I move on into the next part of this story, I would just like to remind everybody, if you haven't already, to please like the video and subscribe to the channel. I started working on this story around the same time that I did the story about Valerie Stevens, because some people believed that these two might have been connected to the same killer. After doing some reading and research on these cases, I personally do not believe that the man that they accused of killing this woman, I'm not really sure that he killed the other women. They said that his DNA was found on this woman's body, this Lynda Shaw, but I'm not really sure. He had been in trouble for robbery and he had shot and killed a police officer and a witness who saw him do that. And I don't know that rape and attacking women was in his history. There was no other cases of it that they brought against him other than this one. He had already died years earlier before they named him as this woman's killer. So not only myself, but some other people in some comments that I read wonder if maybe the police just said, okay, this is the guy, because they wanted to close this case, because this family had stayed, you know, adamant after the police to do something about this. But this is an update that was posted in 2005. The mother of a murdered university student in Ontario expressed disbelief and outrage Friday that justice officials released a convicted killer to strike again and kill her daughter. Lynda Shaw was murdered 15 years ago, or 15 years before this. Police announced in London on Friday that they now know that a killer who was on parole after serving 12 years for two other murders was Lynda's killer. Shaw's mother, Carol Taylor, had police deliver a blunt statement on her behalf. I feel that Lynda and our family have been betrayed by the federal justice system, and that a cold-blooded murderer was put back on the street. I don't know why this man was released from prison after only 12 years, and I don't know, other than the fact that the police say that his DNA was found on this woman's body, and years had passed before DNA testing became a tool that they could use to solve crimes. This man had already died, and there was no justice for the family in their eyes, because this man was walking free all this time, having been released from prison for two murders. And the way they're looking at it is, had he continued to stay in prison, he wouldn't have been out at the time when their daughter was out there. Police announced that they now know who killed Lynda Shaw, but they wouldn't say who it was. Now, this was something that I couldn't figure out, except for the fact that, just like the mother said, they were going to get a lot of ridicule. They were going to get a lot of people coming down on them because they had released this man. Now, the police themselves didn't release him. It was the justice system who let him sit in prison for 12 years and then released him after he had murdered two people. And he was living in a halfway house in the area. Lynda Shaw was a college student. She was returning home. She had stopped off at a convenience, like a rest stop convenience store area, had gotten some food, got back into her car, was continuing on her drive home when she had a flat tire, or her tire blew out. And police believed that someone had messed with her tire. The food she had bought was still sitting on the front seat. The back window had been busted out or shot out. It's my belief that Lynda, alone on a dark night driving, gets this flat tire that she pulls over. She refused to roll down her window for whoever this was. This man they said, was probably following her, had probably messed with her tire at this gas station while she was inside. And she didn't drive too far before her tire went flat. And I believe that the reason he broke out or shot out her back window was because she wouldn't open the window to let him inside. But police believe that this man followed her, pulled her over. She pulled us over. He stops to be a good Samaritan, to offer her help. And then the rest is, she went missing and her body was found. Police say they're still looking for one other suspect in the case. A second person may be involved with the disposal of her body. Now, I just don't believe this. And the clothing and stuff that was found around her body, some people just didn't believe that it belonged to this man. This is why police threw in this other possible accomplice because of the size of the coat. Back in 1990, DNA testing wasn't available. Things have evolved and we do conduct investigations differently. Now, some people wondered if this man was also responsible for the disappearance and rapes of several other women, including Valerie Stevens. I looked for a long time, but I couldn't find anything saying that his DNA was ever linked to any other rapes or sex crimes or murders of any other women. And as far as this accomplice, I don't know if police were running separate DNA, if they thought there was other DNA found at the crime scene on her body. She had spent the weekend at home. It was Easter weekend. This was a very intelligent young woman who was an engineering student, and she had a good head on her shoulders, according to her family. I don't know that she had a boyfriend, so I don't know if they were able to find any other male DNA. They kept going back to this coat that was burned, and they kept saying it couldn't have been this McDonald's because it was too large. It was too small. It wouldn't have fit him because he was a very big man. I mean, they do believe he was because of his DNA. Maybe he was. Maybe this parka belonged to some other man that lived in this halfway house with him. Was there another man at this halfway house that police had kind of suspected might be involved, and did they ever look into that? I don't know, but I'm going to continue to work on these other cases of these other women and see what police found about them, see what information I can find about them. I personally don't think that this McDonald was linked to any of these other women. I think that once his DNA was found and they said that his DNA was linked to Lynda, I think they would have run the DNA from these other murders and crimes if there was any, and to see if his DNA and to see if any other men's DNA might have shown up that was connected to him, that maybe was from this halfway house. But in the weeks to come, keep watching for an update on that or for a follow-up video on those women's stories. Thanks for watching.